Okay, hello Cloud Gurus, and welcome to this lab, where we're going to start our very first virtual machine in the Google Cloud. So to start off with, log into the console with your user account, select the same project as we were using for the Google Cloud Storage Labs, and open up Cloud Shell. Alright, I'll see you over there. Okay, so here we are in the shell, and we can make sure that we've got the right project selected by running gcloud config get value project. And it shows us that we are indeed in the Services Exploration Labs project. Of course, you can see the same thing up here in this Cloud Shell tab label, but it's definitely important for the exam to know the several different ways that you can check which project you're currently working against. Well, alright, since we want to start a virtual machine in Google Compute Engine, let's check to make sure that there aren't any running yet. We type gcloud compute instances list. Now before I hit enter on this command, what do you think it's going to do? Have you made your guess? Well, let's see if you're right. So was this what you expected? Well, don't feel bad if it wasn't, because most people would not have expected this result. Now I'm going to show you a bit about what this means, so I'm just going to accept the default choice of no as indicated by the capital N in this prompt. Just hitting enter will do that. And we see that the result of this API call was 403, telling us that we're not allowed to do that. So let's come back to this message in a little bit. Right now instead, I want you to type gcloud services list. Now this shows us a bunch of different services, but let's find out a little bit more about what this command actually means. Now I showed you before that you can add --help to any command to get a lot more information about it. But in this case, I'm just going to add the shorter form -h to get a shorter version of the help information too. Now here we see that we're allowed to pass the flags --available or --enabled. So let's try the --enabled one first. Well, that looks pretty familiar, and it's because --enabled is the default. Now I'll note that BigQuery is on this list, and if you'll remember, we set up a billing export to BigQuery earlier on. So what would happen if we disabled the BigQuery API here? What do you think would happen? Would we break the billing export that we'd set up? Well, think about the data flow and the scope of the information that we're looking at and the impact of the change that we might make. This list is the APIs that are enabled for this specific project. So is this specific project writing to BigQuery? No, it's not. This project can incur some charges, and those charges will show up in the trial billing account that we set up. The trial billing account is the source of the data, but the export and the actual use of the BigQuery API will happen in the admin project. But the reason we didn't have to go through any rigmarole of enabling APIs for BigQuery when we set up that admin project is because these APIs that we're looking at right now are enabled by default for all new projects. And this is the same reason that we didn't have any trouble when we did the Google Cloud Storage Labs. But enough of that. So let's try --available then. And oh wow, we see a lot more stuff now. Well, let's try rerunning that command, but this time let's pipe the output of that command, indicated by this vertical bar, to the command grep compute. Now if you're not familiar with this pipe syntax, it just takes the output of whatever command is on the left and passes it as input to whatever command is on the right. In this case, grep will only show lines that include the word compute. And here we see that compute.googleapis.com is available. So if we wanted to enable this service, we would type gcloud services, and if again we use -h just to see what things we're allowed to do at this level, we see that we can disable, enable, or list. So we could definitely run gcloud services enable compute.googleapis.com, and that would get us past this particular block. But we don't want to do that yet either. Instead, let's go back to this gcloud compute instances list. When we say no to this prompt, it gives us a URL that we can follow, so let's do that now. And here we see yet another way that we can enable this API. So where are we? Well, we're in the Google APIs section of the console, and it has pre-selected the Compute Engine API for us. But let's go back up a level. And here we see a whole bunch of different services. Do any of them look familiar to you from when we were looking at the list of available APIs? We can filter this list to groups like the Google Cloud APIs. But let's go up another level from the API library. And here it becomes even more clear that this is just the APIs and services section in the console. Here on this main dashboard, we see the same list of enabled APIs that we saw in the command line, with easy links to disable any of them. Clicking on Enable APIs and Services just takes us back to the library. But let's still not enable the API just quite yet. Before we do, let's go over to the navigation menu and head to IAM and Admin. Here in the IAM section of the console, we see the permissions that have already been set on this project. The user account that we're currently using is the owner of the project, and it's the only account with any permissions here. Now we could add anyone we wanted to this project with the Add button up here, but we don't need to do that right now. Instead, on the left, let's find the Service Accounts section. And here we see that there aren't any yet. Alright, that's all we cared about here for now, so let's head back to the main dashboard. From here, let's navigate to the Compute Engine section of the console. And just by doing this, it is now enabling the Compute Engine API. Now this can take several minutes to finish, so I'm going to fast forward the video for you. Well, now that that's finished, let's go back to the Cloud Shell and rerun the exact same command. And there we go. Now we're allowed to find out that we have no running instances. But before we start an instance, let's take a look at the result of what happened when we navigated to the Compute Engine section of the console. Let's run gcloud services list. And here we go. compute.googleapis.com has now been enabled. But interestingly, that's not all. This oslogin.googleapis.com has also been enabled. And if we go back to the IAM section in the console, we see that more stuff has been added automatically. We still have our owner account that we had before, but we now also have a Compute Engine default service account, a Google APIs service agent, and a Compute Engine service agent. 3 new identities, each one identified by an email address that includes our project number. Now it may be useful for you to remember the format of these email addresses, but don't worry about that quite yet. Alright, of course the reason I had you go to the service accounts list before we navigated to the Compute Engine section of the console was because I wanted to show that this service account was created automatically. Now it is possible to go and delete this auto-created service account, but we definitely don't want to do that yet. Well, alright, I said that this lab was going to be about creating our very first virtual machine, so let's do that now. We type gcloud, compute, instances, create, my VM. We didn't specify a zone, so it suggests this one, so sure, why not? And there we go, our first virtual machine. Now this lab was really all about enabling the APIs and getting the service configured. So I'm just going to delete this VM now, and we'll run a new one in the next lab instead. Was this maybe a little bit different than you expected? Were you maybe thinking that the bulk of this lab was going to be in choosing different options about how to set up the virtual machine? Poof, gone. Well, alright. I hope you found that useful to see how different services may need to be enabled and configured so that you can start using them. And I hope you also took note of the many different ways you can enable APIs in Google Cloud. Those will definitely come up both in the real world and on your exam. Alright, if you have any questions, please let me know. If not, please feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you.